The cry in the market was loud, full of shouting voices and metal noises. Traders called out prices. Buyers argued. Slaves stood quietly in chains, some too tired to lift their heads. It smelled of dust, oil, and something burning. This place was not kind. It was a place where no one looked twice at suffering. But in the middle of all that noise, one voice stood out, not loud, not angry, but full of pain. A small alien girl stood barefoot on a wooden crate. Her clothes were torn. Her eyes were too big for her thin face. She wasn't selling herself. She was begging someone to take her mother, her hand held tightly to the older woman beside her. "Please," she said again and again, "take my mom. She can cook. She's the best cook. You won't be sorry." No one stopped. A few laughed. One man threw a fruit at her and walked away. The girl didn't stop. Her voice didn't break. She just kept saying the same words with all the hope in her heart. "She can cook. Please just take her. She's kind. She won't fight." Her mother said nothing. She had seen this before. She had once begged for her daughter to be spared. Now her daughter was begging for her. The woman's name was Inari. Her skin was a pale shade of silver, her eyes soft and tired. She had once lived in a warm house on a peaceful moon, but war and loss had taken everything. Now she was here, standing in the dust while her child offered her up like a trade. Most people didn't care. They came here to buy strong workers, warriors, or pleasure slaves, not cooks. A woman like Inari meant nothing to them. But then, someone stopped. A man, human. He wore dark clothes and carried no weapon in sight. But the way others stepped away from him said he was dangerous. He had a calm face, unreadable eyes. His name was Mason, though no one knew that here. He just watched the girl. Then he looked at the woman. He didn't speak. The seller, a thick-bodied alien with green scales, leaned forward. "Special deal, human. You take both girl and mother. Half price." Mason said nothing. The seller tried again. "Good cook. That's what the kid says. Maybe she'll make your human food." Maybe. Mason reached into his coat and pulled out a credit chip. He tossed it on the counter. "Just the woman," he said. The seller frowned. "Not the girl?" "She's young." Could. Mason's eyes turned cold. "Just the woman." There was a long pause. Then the seller grabbed the chip, grumbled, and unlocked the collar around Inari's neck. The girl looked shocked. "Wait, not me?" she asked. In fear. "You're not taking me?" Inari dropped to her knees and hugged her daughter tightly. Her voice shook. "It's okay. It's okay. I'll be fine. You stay strong. Stay safe." The girl cried, but Inari wiped her tears. "He looks like someone who keeps his word," she whispered. Then to the human she said, "Please. One thing, don't hurt her." Mason gave a small nod. "I didn't come here to hurt anyone." He turned and walked away. Inari followed, still unsure, still shaking. She didn't know what kind of life waited for her now. But the look in the human's eyes had been different. Not hungry, not cruel, just tired. Like hers, behind them, the girl's cries faded. In the noise, Inari looked back only once. The crate, the crowd, the market, they all seemed to fade behind her. She didn't know if she would ever see her daughter again, but in her heart, something strange happened. She felt a spark. Hope. Mason didn't speak again until they reached his ship. It wasn't large or fancy. Just clean, quiet, safe. He opened the door and let her step inside first. Then he said, "There's food in the back. A kitchen. If you want to cook something, cook. If not, rest. No one here will chain you." Inari blinked. She didn't understand. Was this a trick? A test? But when she stepped into the kitchen, she saw everything. A clean stove. Real ingredients. even spices from different worlds. Her hand shook as she touched the counter. It had been years since she had touched a real kitchen. Without thinking, she began to cook. Simple things: soft bread, warm stew, a few herbs from her memory. Her hands moved like they remembered more than her mind did. When Mason tasted her food later that night, he didn't say anything. He just sat there, staring at the bowl. Then he whispered something she didn't expect. "This tastes like home." And that's when Inari knew something had changed. Maybe not just for her, but for him too. And maybe it was only the beginning. A meal that made him cry. Mason had eaten food from 100 worlds. Military rations, alien protein cubes, fake meat printed from machines. He had tried it all. But none of it ever stayed in his memory. None of it made him feel anything. Until now, the smell came first. Rich, warm, and comforting. It wrapped around him like a blanket. He hadn't even asked Inari to cook. She had gone into the kitchen on her own. She didn't ask for tools or ingredients. She just looked around quietly, touched the counters like she was greeting old friends, and began to move. At first, Mason said nothing. He watched from the corner of the room, curious but silent. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were still. Unsure. She didn't know if this man was testing her or if he truly meant what he said. All she could do was trust the one thing she knew: her food. It had kept her daughter alive for years in secret shelters. Maybe it could protect her again. She stirred the pot gently, added just the right spices, and baked a type of bread that no human had tasted before. She didn't follow a recipe. Everything came from memory and feeling. It wasn't fancy, but the smell made Mason sit up straighter. For the first time in years, his body remembered hunger, not survival hunger, but the kind that came from missing something deeper. When Inari placed the bowl in front of him, she stepped back. She didn't speak. She waited. Mason picked up the spoon slowly. He looked down at the stew, thick, golden, with floating herbs that shimmered in the light. He took one bite. And froze. His jaw didn't move at first. Then he chewed, slowly. Very slowly. His eyes didn't blink. He didn't look at Inari. He just sat there, holding the spoon, staring into the bowl. Then, without warning, something strange happened. A tear rolled down his cheek. Not from pain. Not from fear, but from something he couldn't explain. A memory stirred in him. He didn't even know which one. Maybe it was a dinner long ago. Maybe his mother's voice. Or maybe something he'd lost and forgotten in the cold years of war and missions. Inari watched carefully. She didn't know what to think. Was he angry? Was he sad? Then he finally spoke, just one soft sentence. "This tastes like home." That's when she knew. This man had been wandering a long time too. For the rest of the night, Mason said very little. He asked no questions. He gave her no orders. But when he looked at her, his eyes had changed. There was a softness now, a respect, and maybe even a tiny bit of wonder. Inari didn't talk about her past. She didn't tell him how she had once cooked for royal families on a peaceful moon, or how, when the invaders came, she used food to keep her daughter strong while hiding underground. She didn't share how she traded spices for safe passage, or how many nights she cried while boiling roots for soup. She didn't have to. The food spoke for her. Over the next few days, Inari continued to cook. She never asked what Mason did for work. She didn't ask where he got his money or why he lived alone in deep space. But she noticed things. His weapons were always cleaned, but never used lately. He avoided calls from certain numbers. And sometimes he stared out into space like he was searching for something or running from it. He always ate every bite she gave him. But Inari didn't know someone else had taken notice. The man who had sold her at the market had good eyes. And more importantly, he had good ears. Word had already spread across the black markets. A human had bought a useless slave, a cook. And now, that cook was making food that changed the mood of everyone who tasted it. It was healing the sick, calming fighters, and even causing enemies to put down weapons and eat together. That kind of food. Wasn't just food. It was power. And in places like these, power was dangerous. One quiet night, a message arrived on Azimuth. Mason's secure channel. It came from an unknown source. Just 4 simple words. Return the slave immediately. Mason read it once and deleted it. But his jaw tightened. His eyes darkened. Inari, in the other room, was baking flatbread with a soft smile on her face. She had just taught herself to hum again. She didn't know that someone had noticed her gift. She didn't know that, to some people, her cooking was a threat. But Mason did, and he wasn't about to let anyone take her away, not now. Not ever. Asterisk secrets in the recipe every morning. Inari woke early. She didn't need an alarm. Her body was trained by years of struggle, her hands already moving before her eyes opened. But now, for the first time in a long time, there was no fear in those movements. She wasn't cooking to beg for food or to survive one more day in hiding. She cooked because something inside her felt alive again. Mason never asked her to cook. He never gave her orders or expectations. But every morning he sat quietly at the table, waiting with calm eyes, and every morning the ship was filled with smells that made even the old walls feel warmer. But there was something strange in the food. Something even Mason couldn't explain. One night, a mercenary friend came by, half dead with a deep plasma wound. Mason told him to rest while Inari prepared soup. The man groaned and cursed the whole time, until he tasted the first spoonful. Within hours the pain eased, his fever dropped. The next morning he stood up on his own and walked without limping. "Where did you find her?" he whispered to Mason. "That wasn't soup. That was a miracle." Another time, Mason invited a trader who was always full of anger. The man had insulted everyone at the table before the food came. But after 2 bites of Inari stew, he leaned back in silence, his fists unclenched. He began telling stories about his childhood. He even laughed. Mason started to pay attention. He tested the food with medical scans. No poisons. No nanobots. No drugs. The food was clean, natural. Yet something changed in people after they ate it. Their bodies healed faster. Their minds calmed. Even Mason, who barely slept before, now rested through the night. His dreams weren't full of fire and screams anymore. He didn't understand it. And neither did Inari. When he asked her, she just said, "It's my family's way. We don't use machines. We feel the food. That's all." But Mason didn't believe it was that simple. He started looking through old records, very old ones. He dug into lost colonies, forgotten cultures. And there, buried deep in a historical archive, he found something. A people once known as the Kirellan Flamehands. Long ago, before war and conquest scattered their kind, they were famous for one thing, not weapons, not science, but food. Their cooking was said to bring peace to violent tribes, heal wounded soldiers, even stop wars. Most thought it was a myth, a story. But their homeworld was burned in a raid and their survivors vanished, until now. Mason looked at Inari again with new eyes, her quiet movements, her patience, the way she hummed when she cooked. Could she be one of them? He didn't ask, not yet, because he wasn't the only one who noticed. At the edge of the system, a shadow moved. A small drone, silent and cloaked, sent images back to its master. Photos of Inari, scans of the food. A voice whispered over the comms, cold and sharp, "That's her. That's the one we lost." In a dark corner of space, a powerful syndicate sat up straighter. They had tried for years to recreate the Kurelin gift. They had stolen blood, tortured survivors, tested fake versions of the food, but it never worked. The secret was lost. Until now, the order went out. Bring her back, alive, if possible. But kill the human if he resists. Back on the ship, Inari placed a plate in front of Mason with a small smile. Try this, she said softly. It was my daughter's favorite. Mason took a bite. It was sweet, simple, and warm. His mind filled with an image not his own, but a memory. A small alien girl laughing in a sunlit field. He put the fork down slowly. How did you do that? He asked, stunned. Inari tilted her head. Do what? That memory I saw. Someone laughing, a child. It wasn't mine. She looked confused. I don't know. That dish always made my daughter laugh, even on hard days. Maybe it remembers. Mason realized then it wasn't just the food. It was her. Her feelings, her memories, her love, all of it was somehow inside each dish. And that made her more valuable and more dangerous than she knew. But before he could say more, an alert flashed on the ship screen. A bounty had been placed. Not on Inari, on him. And that meant time was running out. Asterisk, the humans past Mason had always kept his past buried like a locked box in the back of his mind. He had no family, no home planet to return to, no real name anymore. Just a call sign that no one dared speak. In this part of the galaxy, he was known as a quiet trader, a man who stayed out of trouble. But before that, he had been someone else. Someone feared. Someone who knew how to end wars before they began. Inari didn't ask questions. She could feel the weight he carried. She didn't need to know the details. But Mason knew that silence wouldn't protect them forever. Something had shifted the day he bought her. Her food had started healing him, not just his body, but his nightmares too. The old pain he locked away was waking up. And with it, so were his enemies. When Mason received the second message, he didn't delete it. He stared at the words for a long time. We know who she is. You have 3 days. He didn't tell Inari. He didn't want to scare her. But she noticed he cleaned his old weapons that night, guns he hadn't touched in years. She saw how his eyes stayed on the stars longer, calculating routes. Something was coming. The next morning, a voice from the past arrived. A private signal. On a dead frequency. Mason answered it alone. Still pretending to be a nobody, old friend? Said the voice. It was Sorvin, a mercenary commander. One of the few who knew Mason's old identity. One of the few who had fought beside him when their unit fell apart. Sorvin didn't waste time. They're moving. A full squad. Not bounty hunters, collectors. The kind who don't take no for an answer. Mason stayed quiet. Sorvin went on. They're not after you. They're after her. That cook of yours. They call her the memory chef. Whatever she's putting in those meals, it's driving their scientists mad. They want her blood, Mason. What happens if they take her? Mason finally asked. She won't survive the lab. They'll keep her alive long enough to pull everything out of her and then burn the rest. You know how this works. Mason's FIST tightened. Send me their approach vector. You sure? This won't be easy, and it won't be clean. Mason ended the call. He didn't care about easy or clean. That night, he sat across from Inari while she kneaded dough. The way her fingers worked the flour, the way she smiled to herself, it was almost peaceful. But he could see the flicker of worry behind her calm face. She wasn't blind. I know something is wrong, she said quietly. Mason didn't answer right away. He watched the soft rise of the dough and thought of all the blood he had once spilled. They're coming for you, he said at last. I won't let them take you. Inari looked down. She had known this day might come. Her people's gift wasn't just rare, it was hunted. Her grandmother once told her, "If they ever taste your food and don't smile, run." Mason leaned forward. "You said your recipes were passed down, right?" She nodded. "And no one else can cook like you, even with the same ingredients." Another nod. "That's because the real ingredient isn't in the food, it's in you." Inari looked up, surprised. "It's why the scans found nothing. It's why your cooking works. It's tied to your emotions, your memories." She didn't deny it. "We call it soul binding. We don't cook from the mind. We cook from the heart. That's why I never taught my daughter recipes. I told her to remember feelings, not steps." Mason stood. "Then they'll never understand your power. They'll try to bottle it, break it, and fail. But they'll kill you trying." He walked to the ship's console and started tapping commands. Shields up. Engines prepped. Defense drones armed. He wasn't a traitor now. He was the soldier again. And this time, he had someone worth protecting. In the silence that followed, Inari stood beside him. She placed something in his hand. A small package wrapped in cloth. "It's for tomorrow," she said softly. "Eat it if we live." He opened it. Inside was a tiny, golden pastry, something sweet, warm, and glowing faintly. "What is it?" he asked. She smiled gently. "Something I only make for people I love." Mason didn't know what to say. Number. One had said that word to him in years, but now he had no time to answer, because a red alert flashed on the screen. Enemy ships had just entered the system. Asterisk, the burning kitchen fire was the first thing he saw, bright, violent, and hungry. The smell of smoke hit him before the alarms did. Mason's heart pounded as he ran into the ship. Doors had been torn open. Systems were fried. Sparks flew from broken panels. But the only thing he cared about in that moment was the kitchen. It was gone. The room that once smelled like hope now stank of ashes. The counter Inari used to hum over had been shattered. Bowls lay broken, spices scattered like dust in a storm. Flames licked the edges of the room, but Mason ignored them. His eyes searched the smoke for one thing. Enari. She wasn't there. Then came a sound, small trembling. He followed it, kicked open a supply hatch, and found the little girl, Inari's daughter, hiding in the shadows, curled up with tear-streaked cheeks. "They came," she whispered. "Big men. Cold eyes. They took Mama." Mason knelt, trying to keep his voice steady. "How many?" "4, she sniffed. "No. 5. They knew where to go. They didn't care about anything else. They burned everything." He looked around. Every wire, every trace of her food, every spice gone. Or destroyed. This wasn't a random raid. This was precision. Someone wanted her, and wanted her secrets erased behind her. Mason didn't wait. He handed the girl a small beacon and told her to stay hidden in the emergency pod. "If I'm not back in 2 days, press this," he said. "It'll take you to a safe moon." Then he grabbed his gear and left, but as he walked toward his hidden ship, the older, armored one he hadn't used in years, his mind wasn't full of plans. It was full of rage. This wasn't just about Inari anymore. They had taken something gentle, something rare, and they thought they could twist it into a weapon. Mason knew the syndicate well. Years ago, he'd done missions for them, dark missions. Things no soldier should be proud of. He knew where they hid their labs, where they took people who had value. He had once helped them silence a healer on a jungle moon, just because. Her touch could undo pain without medicine. Now they had Inari, and Mason wasn't going to knock on the door. He was going to break it. Meanwhile, in a dark facility carved deep into an asteroid, Inari stood in a cold, white room. Her hands were chained. Machines buzzed around her. A wall of glass separated her from a table filled with stolen ingredients. "Cook," said a voice. Inari said nothing. "We know you can do more than feed. We want what's in your blood, your memories, your binding." Still, she stayed silent. A needle pricked her arm. A drop of blood was taken, but the machine blinked red unstable. They didn't understand. Inari wasn't a source. She was the recipe. Without her will, her food was nothing. She closed her eyes and thought of her daughter, of Mason's quiet smile when he tasted her stew, of the first real laughter she heard after years of silence. Her captors didn't know it, but they were already failing. Back in space, Mason's ship tore through the black like a spear. He flew fast, using old codes and dead frequencies to slip through patrols. His old name was whispered in some systems still, enough to make people look the other way when they saw his eyes dot by the time he reached the asteroid. He didn't wait for a landing code. He crashed through the outer wall, blasting in with a sonic boom that shook the ground. He moved like a ghost with a storm in his heart. Guards tried to stop him. None lasted more than a breath. He reached the lab in under 10 minutes, and there she was, still standing, still proud, even in chains. When she saw him, her face didn't show fear, just quiet relief. "I knew you'd come," she said. He stepped forward and destroyed the locking panel. The cuffs dropped. She fell into his arms, weak but alive. Behind them, alarms blared louder. The building shook. Explosions lit the hallways. Had to run, but before they left, Inari turned to the cooking table. She picked up one simple herb and tucked it into her pocket. Mason raised an eyebrow. "For later," she whispered. They escaped through fire and gunfire, bruised but not broken. And behind them, the lab, the heart of a cruel empire, collapsed into dust. But as they flew away, Mason didn't think of the battle. He thought of the small pastry waiting back on his ship, and he promised himself next time he would eat it. Together. The recipe of life. No one spoke during the journey home. The stars passed quietly outside the window, and the engines hummed in a steady rhythm. Mason sat beside Inari, her daughter curled up and sleeping in the corner, finally safe for now. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with everything unsaid, questions, wounds, and truths that could no longer be avoided. Mason had seen a lot of strange things in his life, planets made of glass, creatures that spoke through scent, storms that sang before they struck. But nothing had shaken him like what he'd seen in that lab. Scientists weren't just trying to copy Inari's food. They were trying to pull her apart, measure her soul in numbers, turn something sacred into something they could sell. And all of it failed, because they didn't understand the real source of her power. Back on the ship, Inari didn't go to rest. She went to the kitchen. It was ruined, burned walls, shattered tools, ash where bread once rose. Still, she walked through it slowly, her fingers brushing the surfaces, remembering each corner like an old friend. Then she turned to Mason. "It's time," she said softly. He followed her to the small storage room, one of the few places untouched by the fire. From a hidden pouch, Inari pulled out something strange. A seed, no bigger than a fingernail. It glowed faintly, with warmth that couldn't be explained. "This is what they were trying to find," she said. "But it's not the seed itself that holds the power. It's how it's planted, and who plants it." Mason watched as she placed it into a small pot, covered it with soil, and whispered something in a language he didn't know. Then, incredibly, the seed began to sprout, slowly, gently. A green shoot reached toward the light. "This is how it works," she said. "Our ancestors didn't cook to impress. They cooked to remember." Every recipe was a story. Every dish carried feelings. Love, sorrow, joy, fear, it all went in. That's what gave the food power. Mason frowned. "So your body, it stores those memories?" She nodded. "My people passed them down through taste. We didn't write books. We made meals. That's how we kept our history, our strength. But over time, the gift faded. Only a few of us kept it alive, Mason finally understood. The food healed not because of ingredients, but because of the emotion woven into it. And Inari was the last true bearer of that legacy. "They'll never stop hunting you," he said. "I know. Then what now?" Inari looked at him, really looked at him. "Now, we plant more seeds." She reached into a second pouch and pulled out another seed. Then she handed it to Mason. "It won't grow unless you mean it," she said. "You can't fake it. You have to plant it with truth." He stared at it, unsure. "I'm not like you," he said. "You are," she replied gently. "You just forgot how to feel." Mason knelt beside the pot, pressed the seed into the soil, and closed his eyes. He thought of the people he'd lost, the friends who never came back, the times he'd smiled but didn't mean it. And then he thought of her. When he opened his eyes, the second plant had sprouted. Inari smiled. "You see?" she whispered. "It's not just me anymore." And in that quiet room, something incredible happened. The air felt warmer. The damage to the ship didn't matter. The pain of the past didn't matter. Because for the first time, Mason understood. He wasn't just protecting a person. He was helping bring something back to life. A forgotten culture. A recipe for healing a broken universe. Outside, stars burned silently. Inside, two tiny green shoots glowed with hope. And the next meal Inari made wasn't just food. It was the beginning of something far greater than either of them had imagined. The real ingredient. The galaxy was still dangerous. Greedy empires still ruled, and cruel syndicates still hunted what they didn't understand. But in one small corner of space, aboard a half-burned ship with a regrown kitchen, something rare had begun to bloom. Not just a new plant, but a new way of living. Mason had rebuilt the cooking space with his own hands. Not with steel and wires, but with quiet care. Every panel he replaced, every surface he cleaned, was done with the same patience Inari used when preparing food. He didn't tell her, but in his own way, he was learning. Not just how to cook, but how to feel again. Inari had started writing her recipes down, not in a book, but in a small collection of wooden plates, each engraved with symbols and emotions. "Food isn't just for eating," she told him. "It's for remembering." Her daughter helped too, humming tunes while grinding spices, her laughter echoing off the clean walls. The ship no longer felt like a machine, it felt like a home. But something still hung in the air. The truth Mason hadn't asked, the one thing she never fully explained. One night, while they sat quietly after dinner, Mason finally asked her the question that had stayed in the back of his mind since the market. "Why did your daughter beg me to take you?" "Not herself, not both of you, just you." Inari looked down, fingers wrapped around a warm cup. "Because she knew I was fading," she whispered. "I'd stopped singing, stopped tasting. I was surviving, not living. She thought if I cooked again, I'd come back." Mason said nothing. "She believed in something I didn't anymore," Inari continued. "She thought someone somewhere might still care. And she was right." He stared at her. "You didn't just give me food. You gave me something I didn't think I needed." "What's that?" He smiled faintly. "A reason to come back tomorrow." Then Inari reached into the shelf and brought out a single pastry. Small, golden, glowing faintly like a soft sun. "The one I gave you before the fire?" she asked. He nodded. "This is another. Same kind, but this time I want you to eat it now." Mason took a bite. In that moment, something strange happened. Not a vision, not a memory, but a feeling, pure and deep. It was peace, not the kind born from silence, but the kind born from being seen, being valued, being loved. Tears rose to his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. Inari leaned closer. "That's the real ingredient. The thing the labs couldn't extract. The thing they'll never grow in tubes. What is it? He asked softly. She smiled. Love. That night, the stars outside felt closer. The ship didn't hum like a machine. It breathed like a living thing. And far beyond, rumors began to spread. Of a woman whose food could calm armies. Of a human who gave up profit to protect something sacred. Of a place where broken people went and left whole again. They called it many things. The memory ship, the recipe star, the kitchen of peace. But Mason and Inari didn't care about names. They just cooked, and the galaxy slowly began to heal, one meal at a time.